My husband tried to make me sign away my rights, so I turned the tables on him. When I married Daniel, I thought I'd found the man who'd never lie to me. Turns out, I married the best liar I've ever met. If you saw us in the beginning, you'd never believe what came after. We looked like the couple from those luxury perfume ads, the ones where everything glows gold and soft, and the music swells right as the man leans in to whisper something romantic. That was us. Or at least, that's what I thought we were. I met Daniel at a charity gala my boss forced me to attend. I was a marketing assistant, then broke, overworked, and barely surviving off takeout and instant coffee. The kind of girl who'd check her bank account before saying yes to a dinner invitation. He was everything I wasn't. Confident, polished, successful, a lawyer with his own firm, his own condo downtown, his own world. He had that presence, the kind that filled a room without him needing to speak. He smiled like he knew something you didn't. When he talked, people listened. When he laughed, they leaned in. And when his eyes met mine across the bar that night, I swear my heart forgot how to beat. He walked straight up to me, no hesitation, and said, "You don't look like you want to be here." I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Painfully," he said, smirking. "I was about to leave too, but then I saw you." Corny? Maybe. But when a man like Daniel says it, it doesn't sound corny. It sounds like a promise. That night, he ordered me champagne, the expensive kind I'd only seen on menus. We talked for hours about books, travel, ambition, stupid reality shows. He listened to me like my thoughts were rare art. When he asked for my number, I didn't even hesitate. From that night on, he was everywhere. Good morning texts before work, surprise flowers on Tuesdays, dinners where he'd remember tiny things I'd said weeks before. He made me feel seen, really seen. It was like he had studied me and knew exactly how to make me feel safe. Within 6 months, we were living together. Within a year, engaged. He proposed in Santorini cliché. I know, but when you're in love, clichés feel like dreams. He knelt on one knee against that sunset sky and said, "You're the only person I'll ever trust with my life." God, I believed him. Our wedding was small but elegant. My mom cried. My dad walked me down the aisle, beaming like I'd found the best man in the world. I thought I had too. I used to look at Daniel and think, if this isn't forever, nothing is. The first year of marriage was everything people post on Instagram. Breakfast in bed, trips, laughter. He handled the finances. "You don't need to worry about that stuff," he said. "I'll take care of you." It sounded romantic back then. It's funny how the same words can feel like love one year and control the next. He insisted I quit my job, said he wanted me to breathe, to enjoy life after years of working myself to the bone. I protested. I liked working, but he framed it like care. "You deserve a break," he said. "Let me do this for us." So I did. I quit. We lived comfortably. He covered everything, the bills, the house, the car. I didn't even have access to the joint account. I didn't think it mattered. We were a team, right? Sometimes I'd notice how every bill had only his name. The mortgage too. He'd wave it off when I asked. It's just easier this way. Less paperwork. He always had a reason, always logical, always calm. And when you love someone who always sounds rational, you start doubting your own discomfort. I remember one night, a few months after our first anniversary. We were sitting on the balcony drinking wine. I made a joke about buying a place closer to my parents. He laughed a little too hard. "Sweetheart," he said, "that wouldn't make sense financially. The market there's terrible. Besides, I've got everything sorted for us here. Just trust me." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it, like the matter was closed. That was the first crack. Small, barely noticeable. But I felt it. Over time, those cracks multiplied. Subtle things. He'd correct me in front of friends, interrupt me mid-sentence, laugh when I mispronounced a legal term. "You're cute when you try to talk law," he'd say. He always said it with a smile, but it chipped away at me, one joke at a time. Money became his domain entirely. He started giving me an allowance. "It's better this way," he'd explain. "Keeps everything organized." If I asked too many questions, he'd sigh that disappointed sigh and say, "Why don't you trust me?" It worked every time. I'd apologize, blame my anxiety, promise to do better. Love makes you stupid, but manipulation makes you blind. Sometimes he'd check my phone casually at first, then often. "Just making sure no scams or weird calls," he'd say. If I reacted, he'd remind me of that time he found a spam text about a dating site. It wasn't real, but it gave him justification. He didn't yell, he didn't hit, he didn't need to. He was too smart for that. His power was in quiet words that twisted reality. Gaslighting 101. Make her doubt her memory, her instincts, herself. And it worked for a while. But then, life threw something at me that changed everything. It started with a phone call. I still remember that day like a scar that never fades. I was in the kitchen, making coffee. The morning light was soft and Daniel had just left for work. The phone rang and I answered casually, expecting it to be Mom. It wasn't. It was a hospital. They said my father had collapsed in his study. Heart attack. Sudden. They did everything they could, but he didn't make it. I froze. I couldn't even cry at first. Just silence. Thick and deafening. When I finally spoke, the mug slipped from my hand and shattered across the tile. Daniel came home immediately, of course. He held me, said all the right things. "I've got you," he whispered. "Don't worry about anything." I believed him again, because that's what I did best. The funeral was quiet, small, full of people saying how proud my dad would have been of me. I stood there numb, my mind replaying his last voicemail, him reminding me to check the mailbox because he'd sent some papers about the house. Those papers arrived a few days later. They were part of his will. He'd left me everything. His lake house, his savings, his old investments. I didn't even know he had that much. I told Daniel that night. His expression flickered for half a second like he was shocked before it smoothed into that calm lawyer smile. "That's great, honey," he said, pulling me in. "We'll make sure it's all handled properly." At the time, I thought we meant us. Later, I learned it meant him. He immediately took over the paperwork, contacting family attorneys he knew. I was too emotionally drained to care. Every night, he'd sit at the dining table with stacks of documents, occasionally asking me to sign something, just consent forms or transfer verifications, and I trusted him, because that's what wives do, right? But there was one moment I'll never forget. I came downstairs one night to get water and saw him at his laptop. The glow from the screen lit his face cold, focused. He was typing something fast. I noticed my name and my dad's estate in the document title. When I asked what he was doing, he minimized the window instantly. "Just routine stuff," he said, forcing a smile. "Go to bed, babe." Something in me, some tiny flicker of instinct I hadn't felt in years, told me not to. That was the first night I started doubting him. The next morning, he kissed my forehead, said, "I'll handle the finances, okay? You've been through enough." That phrase, "I'll handle the finances," had always sounded protective before, but that morning it felt like a warning. My father's death shattered me, but it also gave me something Daniel never intended: independence. For the first time, there was money and property in my name, something he couldn't fully control. And just like that, his mask started to slip. He became short-tempered, cold. He'd ask casually if I'd decided to merge accounts yet. He'd bring up joint ownership of the lake house. He framed it like partnership, like unity. But his eyes, God. His eyes, they weren't loving anymore. They were calculating. It was subtle at first, questions disguised as concern. "You sure you can handle those taxes alone? Wouldn't it be easier if I managed the assets for you?" I'd laugh it off, saying I was fine. But every time I said no, something in his smile broke a little more. I started noticing patterns. The way he'd mention legal terms casually in conversation: trust, ownership transfers, spousal signatures. The way he'd leave folders on the counter like bait. I wasn't naive anymore. I didn't confront him. I just watched. And with each passing day, I realized the truth. The man I married wasn't protecting me. He was preparing to take everything from me. He told me it was a simple formality. My gut told me it was a trap. You ever have one of those moments where everything around you looks the same house, same person, same voice, but suddenly you feel like you've stepped into a different world? That was me the night Daniel slid the papers across the table. It started innocently enough, like all his traps did. He was sitting at the dining table, laptop open, sleeves rolled up like he was doing something noble and exhausting. The man loved theatrics. There was a stack of documents beside him, all crisp and aligned, like a perfectly staged photo. He looked up at me with that same charming smile I used to fall for. "Hey babe," he said, "can we go over a couple of things from your dad's estate? Just boring paperwork stuff. I've been talking to the accountants." My stomach tightened. Every time he said paperwork, something inside me screamed run, but I didn't. I sat down across from him, pretending to be relaxed. He handed me a document clipped neatly inside a folder. "This is just a joint ownership agreement," he said, tone smooth and casual. "It'll make things easier for tax purposes. The IRS is a nightmare with inheritance cases. Trust me, this is just a formality." Formality. That word hung in the air like smoke. I'd heard him use that tone before, the one that made resistance feel like ingratitude. Still, I smiled and took the papers. "Okay," I said softly. "What's it about exactly?" He leaned back, looking almost amused. "Nothing complicated. It just states that any property or investment under your name can be jointly owned. Technically, that helps us reduce liability." I nodded slowly, flipping through the pages. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Do I need to get it notarized or something?" He shrugged, taking a sip of wine. "No need. I'll take care of that part. You just need to sign." There it was, that just sign tone again. But something about his eyes made me pause. I looked down at the text, scanning line after line of legal jargon, phrases like transference of title, primary beneficiary, and irrevocable consent. Words that didn't feel like joint ownership at all. Daniel watched me like a hawk pretending to be a dove. "You trust me, right?" he said finally. The words were a blade wrapped in velvet. I forced a smile. "Of course I do." He relaxed slightly, thinking he'd won. But in my head, alarm bells were blaring. He stood, kissed the top of my head and said, "Good, we'll sign them tomorrow. I'll make sure everything's in order." And then he left calm, satisfied. The predator convinced his prey was too naive to notice the net tightening. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited until his breathing turned slow and steady beside me, then slipped out of bed quietly. The floor creaked under my feet like it was trying to snitch. In the dim glow of my phone flashlight, I found the folder he'd left on his desk. My hands were shaking as I turned the pages. The first few paragraphs matched what he said, something about shared management rights. But buried deeper, tucked between dense legal references, was the truth. If I signed, I wouldn't just be giving him joint rights. I'd be transferring full ownership of every asset my father left me into Daniel's name. The clause was wrapped in complex lawyer language, something about a primary fiduciary responsibility and designated spousal trustee. But I could read enough to understand I'd lose everything. The house, the savings, the investments, my dad's legacy. I stood there, staring at the paper like it had fangs. My chest tightened. "Daniel," My husband, my so-called protector, had drafted a legal heist disguised as love. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I sank into the office chair, the room spinning. My father's voice echoed in my head. Always read before you sign, kiddo. He'd said it jokingly once when I was 10, helping him with bills. But now it felt like a warning from the grave. I wanted to scream, to tear the papers up and confront him. But something deeper, colder stopped me. Because if I confronted him now, he'd deny it. He'd twist it. He'd win. Daniel was a lawyer. A brilliant one. And I was just the wife he thought was too emotional to think logically. So I did the one thing he'd never expect. I stayed quiet. The next morning, I made pancakes, smiled, laughed, played the perfect wife. Daniel came downstairs, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're in a good mood." I shrugged. Trying to be. He smiled that same confident, infuriating smile. "Good. We can get that paperwork sorted after breakfast." Inside, I was screaming, but outside, I looked calm. He brought the folder to the table, flipping to the last page where the signature line waited like a trapdoor. "Here," he said gently. "Just sign at the bottom." I picked up the pen slowly and looked at him. "You're sure this helps with taxes?" I asked. He nodded, lips curving. "Absolutely. Trust me." That word again. Trust. I pressed the pen down just enough to make a mark, not a full signature, just a faint, deliberate stroke. Then I stopped. "You know what?" I said, smiling softly. "Maybe I should read through this one more time, just to understand it." His jaw tightened for a split second before his expression softened. "Honey, you don't need to. I already reviewed it. You just confuse yourself." That was his mistake, because instead of reassuring me, that sentence ignited something in me, a defiance I didn't know I still had. "Still," I said lightly, "I'd feel better if I understood what I'm signing." He chuckled, fake and brittle. "You're adorable when you're stubborn." But I saw the flicker in his eyes, irritation, sharp and fast. He closed the folder a little too quickly and said, "Fine, take your time. Just don't overthink it, okay?" Overthink. That's what men like him called intuition. When he left for work, I called my friend Claire, one of the few people Daniel had successfully isolated me from. She worked at a small law firm downtown. I didn't tell her everything, just that I needed help understanding a document. She told me to come by quietly. So I did. When she saw the paperwork, her face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "My husband gave it to me," I said, voice trembling. She scanned the pages again, then looked up at me. "This isn't a joint ownership form, Rachel. This is a full asset transfer." "I thought so," I whispered. "He's making you sign everything over," she said, voice sharp with disbelief. "If you signed this, he'd legally own your inheritance. Every penny. You'd have no claim to it." I stared at her, numb. "Can you prove he drafted it?" she asked quickly. "I saw it on his laptop," I said. "He said it was for me to sign." She nodded slowly. "Okay, then you don't confront him yet. Play dumb. Let him think you'll sign. Keep everything he gives you, every document, every message. If he pushes again, record it. He's trying to commit fraud through coercion." Fraud, coercion. Words that sounded too big for my marriage. But that's what it was, wasn't it? Fraud disguised as love. I thanked her, promised to stay quiet, and left. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone walking back to my car. That night, I went home like nothing happened. Daniel was on the couch, sipping wine and watching some legal drama. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Did you get a chance to look at the papers?" he asked casually. "I did," I said softly, setting my purse down. "You're right, it's a lot of legal stuff, but I'll trust you." He smiled a smile so satisfied it made me sick. "That's my girl," he said, kissing my forehead. He didn't notice a small voice recorder hidden in my pocket. Days passed. He kept bringing it up. Subtle reminders at breakfast. Text messages during the day. "Don't forget about that form. We need to finalize it soon. It's just a formality, babe." Each message went into a folder on my phone labeled tax docs, because I knew he sometimes checked my messages. I played my role perfectly. The doting, confused wife who trusted him blindly. Every time he mentioned the papers, I nodded, smiled, promised to get to it soon. Meanwhile, I started collecting evidence. I took photos of the documents. I screen captured his texts. I backed up recordings of every conversation to a hidden drive. The more I observed him, the more disturbing things I noticed. The way his tone shifted when I hesitated. The way he'd go from calm to cold in seconds. One night, I tested something. "I was thinking," I said lightly, "maybe I'll have my lawyer look over the form, just to make sure I understand it." The change in his face was instant. The warmth vanished. "What lawyer?" he asked sharply. I shrugged. "Claire. She works at that small firm downtown." His jaw tightened. "Why would you need someone else? Don't you trust me?" There it was again, that guilt trap he'd perfected. "I do," I said quickly, lowering my eyes. "I just don't want to mess anything up." He stood pacing. "You're overcomplicating this, Rachel. I'm trying to help you. You think I'd screw you over?" The fury in his voice was real, now, not performative. I flinched, and he saw it. His tone softened immediately. Hey, he said, coming closer. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to snap. It's just, you've been so stressed. I want to take care of you." He pulled me into his arms. I forced myself not to recoil. If he noticed how stiff I was, he didn't say anything. But as he held me, I saw the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, like he'd just secured another victory. He thought I was scared. He thought I was submissive. He thought I was stupid. He had no idea he'd already lost. Over the next week, Daniel grew more restless. He'd leave earlier for work, come home later, always asking the same question. "Did you sign yet?" I started to notice him getting careless, leaving his laptop open, papers scattered. Once, I found a draft email he'd written to someone named Elliot. Subject line, "Asset transfer completed soon." That was the night I decided to go all in. If he wanted to play a game of law and lies, I'd play too, only quieter, smarter. I started documenting everything. Every shift in tone, every message, every piece of proof that could one day tell the real story. That the man I loved tried to steal everything my father left me. He thought I'd crumble under pressure. He thought I'd sign without reading. He thought he owned me. But what Daniel couldn't know, was that the woman sitting across from him wasn't the same one who said, "I do." She wasn't blinded by love anymore. She was planning her revenge. If he wanted to play lawyer, I was about to show him what real strategy looked like. I still remember the day I decided to stop crying and start thinking. Up until that point, I'd been surviving on hope and hope that Daniel would somehow go back to the man I thought he was. And fear that the man standing in front of me now was the real version, the one who could look me dead in the eye and lie without blinking. After discovering what he tried to make me sign, something in me snapped. Not loudly, not the kind of breakdown people see in movies where someone screams or throws a glass. Mine was silent, a quiet, calculated decision forming behind a numb smile. I was done being played. But if Daniel wanted to treat marriage like a legal battlefield, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The next morning, I woke up before him and stared at the man sleeping beside me, the man who'd once been my safe place. Now, he was a stranger I needed to outthink. I had to move carefully. Daniel was a lawyer, a damn good one. He'd know if I made any sudden changes, accessing accounts, calling people, moving money. Everything I did had to look normal. So I made breakfast. French toast, his favorite. I smiled. I even laughed when he cracked one of his cute jokes about me being too smart for my own good. And then, while he showered, I hid my father's old watch in my purse, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded me of who I used to be, someone who stood for what was right. I needed that version of me again. That afternoon, I drove downtown, pretending I had a spa appointment. In reality, I parked a few blocks away from Daniel's firm and walked into a small law office tucked between a florist and a bakery. The sign outside read, "Harper Associates, Family Law." The receptionist smiled politely, but I must have looked like I was about to collapse. "I need to see someone about a contract issue," I said, my voice shaking slightly. She nodded and asked me to wait. A few minutes later, a woman in her late 30s came out. Tall, confident, calm, the kind of presence that made you feel like you weren't crazy for worrying. "I'm Laura Harper," she said, extending her hand. "Let's talk privately." Her tone was firm but kind. I followed her into a cozy office where she gestured for me to sit. I didn't even know where to start. The words tumbled out. About my husband, the joint ownership papers, the inheritance, how he'd been controlling everything, even the way I felt about myself. Laura listened. No interruptions, no judgment, just quiet understanding. When I finally slid the papers across her desk, she put on her glasses and started reading. I watched her expression shift, first confusion, then disbelief, then anger. She looked up at me. "He's not just trying to share your inheritance, sweetheart. He's trying to take it. These are irrevocable transfer documents. If you'd signed this, you'd have no legal claim to your own assets." I felt my stomach twist. "I knew it," I whispered. "I knew it wasn't right." Laura nodded. "You were smart to trust your gut. But if your husband is this manipulative, you need to be careful. He'll try again, maybe a different tactic. You need protection and evidence." That word evidence stuck in my mind. "What kind of evidence?" I asked. "Anything that shows coercion, manipulation, threats, or deceit. Audio, video, text messages. Don't confront him directly, not yet. Let him think you're still on his side." The plan was forming. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a weapon, the truth, sharpened by strategy. That night, I came home with a bouquet of lilies, Daniel's favorite. I cooked dinner, poured wine, and smiled through every lie that came out of his mouth. "You've been so understanding lately," he said, cutting his steak. "I was worried you'd be upset about the inheritance stuff. It's really just for legal protection, you know?" I tilted my head and smiled sweetly. "Of course, I trust you, Daniel." He smiled back, but I saw the faint twitch in his jaw, like he knew something wasn't quite right, but couldn't put his finger on it. Meanwhile, my mind was running 10 steps ahead. The next day, I bought a small nanny cam online, disguised as a picture frame. I installed it in the living room, where we usually talked about finances. I placed another in my study, the one room Daniel always entered when I wasn't there. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was survival, and it didn't take long before the camera started capturing things that made my skin crawl. One night, I watched footage of Daniel on my phone while he thought I was asleep. He was pacing in the living room, talking to someone on the phone. "No, she hasn't signed yet," he hissed. "I'm working on it. She'll come around. She always does. Just needs the right push." I froze. Who was he talking to? "Yeah, I'll get her to sign before the quarter ends. I told you, she'd trust me. Stop worrying." Before the quarter ends, that sounded like a deadline, maybe financial, maybe worse. When he hung up, he poured himself another drink, sat down, and stared at my father's photo on the mantle. He smirked. "You'd be proud, old man. I'll make sure your little girl's money doesn't go to waste." I had to cover my mouth to stop myself from screaming. Over the next week, I kept collecting more. Recordings of him mocking me to his friends, saying I was too emotional to handle money. Texts where he guilt-tripped me for asking questions. Even a message where he said, "If you love me, you trust me enough to sign." Laura was right. He was building pressure, slowly and methodically. When I showed her the footage and messages, she nodded approvingly. "This is good. Keep going. If he tries to corner you again, we'll be ready." But Daniel wasn't the kind of man who liked being kept waiting. It happened during dinner, one Friday evening. The air was heavy, that kind of quiet that feels like a storm is about to hit. Daniel had been drinking more lately. He always did when he was nervous. So, he said, swirling his wine, I talked to the accountant again. We really should finalize the ownership transfer soon. You don't want the IRS coming after us, right? I pretended to look concerned. Oh no, of course not. I still don't fully understand it. His smile was tight. You don't need to understand it, babe. That's why you have me. He leaned forward, his voice soft, but dangerous. Do you trust me? I held his gaze. Of course I do. Then sign it. Tomorrow. The command in his voice made my heart pound, but I didn't let it show. Okay, I said finally, if it'll make you happy. His entire body relaxed and he smiled again, that charming, polished grin I used to fall for. He had no idea the picture frame camera right behind him was recording every word. That night, I texted Laura. He's pushing again. I agreed to sign tomorrow. She replied instantly. Good. Let him think he's won. Record everything. Don't actually sign. We'll prepare a duplicate with a small detail change. I'll explain in the morning. The next day, Laura handed me 2 identical looking documents, one real, one fake. This one, she said, pointing at the fake, looks exactly like the one he gave you, but it includes a line invalidating it unless notarized by both parties. You'll sign this version and give him a copy. He won't notice unless he reads every line, and based on what you told me, he won't. It was genius. That evening, Daniel set the scene like he was closing a business deal. Candles, music, my favorite wine. Let's make it official, he said, sliding the papers across the table. I picked up the pen, hands trembling slightly for effect. You're sure this is just for taxes, right? He smiled, brushing my hand. Of course, sweetheart. Just a formality. Inside, I wanted to laugh. I signed the fake document, slowly, dramatically, then slid it toward him. There, I said. Happy? He took it, grinning triumphantly, and tucked it into his folder. You won't regret this. Oh, I'm sure I won't, I said, smiling. The camera in the bookshelf caught it, all his words, his smugness, the entire transaction. That night, I couldn't sleep. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I'd just outplayed a man who made a career out of manipulating others. For the first time in months, I felt powerful. But as I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Because if Daniel realized what I'd done, if he found out he didn't actually own my inheritance, he wouldn't just be angry. He'd be dangerous. And deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. He thought I signed away my future. In reality, he signed his downfall. By the time the weekend rolled around, I'd perfected the act of being the perfect wife again. Sweet, agreeable, just a little nervous, exactly the version of me Daniel liked the most, the one he thought he could control. He'd been unusually chipper the past few days, humming while shaving, buying expensive wine, even suggesting we go somewhere nice. Once this little paperwork was out of the way, I knew that smile, that glint in his eyes. It wasn't love, it was victory. He thought he'd finally won. But the thing about men like Daniel, they never imagine the woman they underestimate might be the one holding all the cards. That Saturday morning, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, curling my hair, forcing my face into calmness. My heart was pounding, but my expression was flawless. I looked confident, in control. I caught my own reflection and whispered under my breath, this is it. Downstairs, Daniel had already set up in the home office. He was wearing his favorite navy suit, the one he reserved for big court cases or high-profile meetings. Apparently, ruining my life was a special occasion. Morning, sweetheart, he said, flashing that smug grin as I walked in. You ready to make this official? I smiled. Of course. He gestured toward the chair across from him, where the papers were already laid out neatly in a folder. Everything about the setup screamed performance. Candles on the side table, a half-filled glass of champagne for me, his watch placed deliberately next to the pen as if to say, time's up. He'd even printed a new copy, claiming the old one had a few formatting errors. If only he knew what real errors look like. I sat down and reached for the folder. Can I just look through it one more time? He chuckled. Still the cautious one, huh? Sure, go ahead. You'll see it's exactly what I said. Just a joint ownership adjustment. My fingers traced the edge of the paper, steady and deliberate. Inside, my pulse was racing, but my face, calm, curious, exactly what I'd practiced. Every inch of me screamed innocent. Okay, I said finally, setting the papers down. I trust you. Daniel leaned back in his chair, satisfaction dripping from his smirk. That's my girl. He slid the pen toward me. Whenever you're ready. I picked it up slowly, like the moment meant something. In a way, it did. Just not in the way he thought. The document in front of me wasn't his. Laura and I had switched it the night before. The fake one, our version, looked identical, down to the signature placement and watermark. The difference? Hidden in plain sight. A clause on page 3 stating that no transfer of assets was legally valid without dual notarization and third-party witness verification. In other words, it was meaningless. But Daniel didn't know that. I signed it carefully, then slid it across the desk. There, done. Daniel's grin widened. He picked up the paper, checked my signature, and exhaled like he'd just won a championship. You have no idea how much this means, he said softly. Oh, I did. He reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Now we can really start building our future, you and me. I squeezed his hand back, meeting his eyes. Our future. Inside, I was screaming, but not from fear, from adrenaline. Because while he was gloating, my lawyer was already one step ahead. Earlier that morning, before Daniel woke up, I'd met Laura at a coffee shop downtown. I handed her the real set of papers, the one Daniel had forged my signature on during his earlier attempts. She had a forensic expert confirm the signature discrepancy, along with my camera footage, audio recordings, and every text that showed his manipulation. By now, Laura's paralegal had already filed the evidence package with the State Bar's Ethics Committee and the Family Court Registrar. Daniel didn't just lose his power, he just signed his own professional death sentence, and he did it smiling. The rest of the day felt like walking through a minefield. Daniel was in a celebratory mood. He opened wine before lunch, called a few of his business friends, and made a joking toast about smart men knowing how to protect their assets. Every word went into my voice recorder hidden in my bracelet. By evening, he'd gotten bolder. Drunk, arrogant, careless. He cornered me in the kitchen, leaned close, and whispered, "See, I told you it was nothing to worry about. Now we don't have to pretend anymore." "Pretend?" I asked, pretending to be confused. He laughed. "Oh, come on, don't play dumb. You knew exactly what this was. You just needed a push." I kept my face blank. "A push?" His grin turned sharp. "You wouldn't have signed otherwise. But that's marriage, isn't it? One person has to take charge. You'll thank me someday when you realize how much simpler things are with me handling the money." I wanted to vomit, but instead I smiled. "You're right, Daniel. You always know best." That line, soft, obedient, perfectly timed, made him relax. He kissed my forehead and walked away, humming to himself. I pressed my bracelet twice, double tap, saving the audio clip. Around 10 p.m., I went to bed early, pretending exhaustion. Daniel stayed in the living room, on a call. I knew better than to think he'd be discreet now. The man had no idea the camera behind the bookshelf was recording every boastful word. He poured himself another drink and started talking. "Yeah, she signed it, finally," he said, chuckling. "Took a little convincing, but she's too soft to say no." Pause. "No, she doesn't know. She thinks it's for taxes. She actually thanked me." Another laugh, louder this time. "Yeah, once this clears, the assets are as good as mine. Hell, I might even sell that damn house her dad left her. I never liked the place." I lay in bed, listening through my phone app, tears burning my eyes. He'd never loved me. Not really. I'd been a project, a challenge, something to conquer, but I wasn't his victim anymore. He just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up before him and packed a small overnight bag. Just the essentials: laptop, documents, charger, a few clothes. Laura texted me at 7 a.m. "It's done. Complaint filed, bar notified, he'll be served soon, be safe." It was almost poetic. I made coffee, pretending it was a normal day. Daniel walked in, still sleepy but smug. "Morning," he said, pouring himself a cup. "You were amazing yesterday, you know that? You finally learned to trust me." I smiled. "I guess I did." He kissed me on the cheek. "I'm heading to the office later. Need to get these documents logged officially." I froze for half a second, then forced a nod. Good idea. Because once he did, the authorities would see the mismatch. His version would conflict with the official file Laura had submitted, showing his forged documents. Every email, every date stamp, every shred of deceit, traceable back to him. He'd incriminate himself without realizing it. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That night, he came home unusually quiet. I could tell something was off. "Rough day?" I asked. He didn't answer, just stared at me for a long time before finally saying, "Did you talk to anyone about our paperwork?" My pulse skipped. "No." "Why?" He studied me. "My associate said the registrar flagged the file as duplicate, said there's already a submission under my name, with different wording." I feigned confusion perfectly. "That's strange. Maybe it's just a clerical error." He didn't buy it. "Yeah, maybe." His eyes lingered on me, sharp, suspicious, but he said nothing else. I kept my expression soft, worried, loving. Inside, my nerves were screaming. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how much. That night was the longest of my life. Daniel didn't sleep. He kept pacing, checking his phone, typing emails. I stayed silent, pretending to doze off while my mind replayed every possible scenario. By morning, I heard him on the phone. What do you mean under investigation?" he shouted. "I didn't forge anything. The documents are legitimate." A pause, then quieter but deadly. "Who the hell would have—" His voice cut off. He turned toward me, realization dawning in his eyes. "You," he said slowly. I blinked. "What?" He stepped closer. "You did this." "I don't know what you're talking about." His jaw tightened. "Don't lie to me, Emily." There it was. The real Daniel. The mask gone. The charm stripped away. Just pure, venomous anger. He grabbed the back of the chair, knuckles white. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined everything." I stood up, meeting his rage with silence. "No, Daniel. You ruined yourself." For a second, he just stared at me, shocked that I wasn't cowering. Then, something almost pitiful crossed his face. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You think you can outsmart me? You can't." I stepped closer, voice steady. "Maybe not in your courtroom, but this isn't your courtroom anymore." I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there, speechless. Outside, I took my first full breath in months. The sun was rising. The air felt cleaner somehow. My phone buzzed. A message from Laura. "He's been officially suspended pending review. You're safe." I looked back at the house that once felt like a cage. Daniel thought he'd trapped me, thought he'd outmaneuvered me. But he forgot one thing about being a lawyer. Every move leaves a paper trail. And I made sure every single one led straight to him. That night, I checked the last recording from the hidden camera, the one that caught him yelling, the threats, the moment he realized everything was over. I saved it. Titled it simply, "The Day I Got My Freedom Back." And as I watched it one final time, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because he thought I'd signed away my future. In reality, he'd just signed his downfall. He thought he'd win because he knew the law, but he forgot I knew the truth. The morning of the court date, I barely slept. My stomach was a jumble of knots, my mind a battlefield of anticipation and anxiety. I sat in the passenger seat of my car, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor me to sanity. Today wasn't just about paperwork or money. It was about exposing a man I once loved for who he really was. A man who had spent years building a perfect image, only to reveal a cold, calculating monster the moment he thought he could manipulate me. I thought of the recordings, the emails, the messages, the staged documents. Every piece of evidence Laura and I had painstakingly collected was ready. My hands tightened around the folder that held the original papers, the ones he'd forged, complete with his signature, the real proof of his deceit. I took a deep breath and reminded myself I was no longer afraid. I wasn't the scared wife who'd hidden behind smiles and tears. This was my life, and I was taking it back. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and desperation. People shuffled through, murmuring in hushed tones, carrying their battles and broken lives on their shoulders. I walked in with my head high, wearing a simple but sharp dress, my hair pulled back. Daniel was already there, leaning casually against the railing, speaking to a colleague. He looked every bit the successful lawyer he pretended to be, a man confident that the law was his shield and sword. When our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something new, unease, maybe even fear, but I didn't let it register. I smiled politely and walked past him, taking my seat next to Laura. The judge entered, a stern woman with a presence that made everyone in the room straighten reflexively. She scanned the courtroom, then settled her gaze on us. Case 4827, Emily Sanders versus Daniel Harris. We will proceed, she said, her voice clear, authoritative. Daniel's confident smirk didn't falter, but I noticed his hands tighten around his briefcase. The proceedings began, as expected, with him attempting to portray me as paranoid, emotional, and overly dramatic. Your Honor, he said smoothly, my client, Emily, is acting out of fear and misunderstanding. She believes I intended to harm her financially, which is categorically false. He gave me a polite, practiced smile, the same one that had made me fall in love with him years ago. Only now, I knew better. Laura stood, calm and composed, her voice measured as she began presenting our evidence. Your Honor, she began, we have recordings, documents, and emails that clearly demonstrate Mr. Harris's intent to coerce, manipulate, and unlawfully gain access to Miss Sanders' inheritance. The judge's eyes narrowed. Please proceed. Laura started with the fake signed document, the one Daniel believed was final. Then she revealed the real document with his forged signature, showing a clear attempt to claim assets unlawfully. She played the recordings of his conversations, his boast about making me sign, his mocking tone, the planning of his deceit. And then the text messages. Oh, the text. His attempts to guilt me into compliance, saying, if you love me, you trust me enough to sign. And you're overcomplicating this, Emily. I'm trying to protect us. Every message exposed the coercion, the manipulation, the lies. I watched him in the courtroom. At first, his smile remained, but as each piece of evidence was presented, it faltered. His fingers twitched. He muttered under his breath. He leaned over to whisper to his lawyer, but the courtroom recording caught every visible reaction. By the time Laura played the footage from the hidden cameras at home, Daniel looked like a man caught in a storm. There he was, smug and self-assured in his living room, explaining how he'd finally gotten me to sign. The judge watched silently, and I felt a surge of triumph. Daniel tried to interject. Your Honor, that recording, she had to have staged. Laura cut him off. No, Your Honor. The recording was made in the residence without any modifications. It captures the exact moment Mr. Harris coerced my client into believing she was signing a legal document. His own words and actions demonstrate intent. The courtroom went silent. Even the spectators leaned forward, intrigued. Daniel's confident facade was crumbling, and for the first time he looked genuinely vulnerable. Not scared, exactly, but exposed. When it came time for me to speak, I rose slowly. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. Your Honor, I began, looking directly at Daniel. For years, I trusted this man. I believed in our marriage. I believed he loved me. But I was wrong. He tried to manipulate me into signing away my father's inheritance. He tried to control my life through fear, coercion, and deception. I paused, letting the words sink in. The courtroom was quiet, everyone hanging on every syllable. I am here today not just to reclaim what is rightfully mine, but to make sure no one else falls victim to this kind of manipulation. The judge nodded. Continue. The case moved swiftly after that. Daniel's defense collapsed under the weight of undeniable proof. Emails, recordings, forged documents, all of it painted a clear picture. He tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. His colleagues at the firm reportedly whispered among themselves. By the end of the hearing, word spread that he was suspended, pending a full review of his conduct. I watched him slouch in his chair, defeated. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and courtrooms was now reduced to a shadow of himself, staring at the floor. The divorce proceedings were next. Daniel tried to fight, of course. He tried to argue for spousal control, joint ownership, even partial custody of minor assets, but every time he attempted a tactic, Laura countered with precise legal references and, more importantly, the undeniable evidence of his coercion. By the end of the week, the divorce was finalized. I retained full ownership of my father's estate. A restraining order was granted. Daniel's legal career was imploding. His firm had already dropped him. And for the first time in months, I felt a deep, intoxicating sense of relief. The real victory, though, wasn't the money. It wasn't the legal documents or the court rulings. It was freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from manipulation, freedom from a man who had made me doubt my own judgment for years. I started rebuilding my life immediately. Financial advisors helped me manage my inheritance wisely. I traveled to places I'd only dreamed of. I reconnected with friends Daniel had tried to isolate me from. And I began volunteering, helping other women recognize the signs of manipulation and coercion before it's too late. Every time I spoke to someone, shared my story, I felt a sense of purpose. I realized that my experience, painful as it had been, could empower others. One evening, months later, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, overlooking the city skyline. The world felt vast, open, full of possibility. My phone buzzed, a message from Laura. "Glad to see you finally breathing." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Feels like I finally am." I thought about Daniel, about the lies, the manipulations, the threats, and I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. Not the way I had. He had lost far more than I had. His arrogance, his entitlement, and his obsession with control had been his undoing. And in a strange way, I almost admired the irony. He had thought he could play lawyer. He had thought he could outsmart me. But he forgot one very important thing. I knew the truth. And truth in the end is far more powerful than fear. I closed my eyes, letting the cool night air wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt entirely in control of my life. He had tried to make me sign away my rights. Instead, he had signed away every chance he had of controlling me again. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.